going to walk you through the process. The topic of this lesson is using spreadsheets to create relative frequency tables. Let's take a look. A spreadsheet is an electronic worksheet that can be used to explore, manipulate, analyze, and interpret data. In any spreadsheet, on the left-hand side, we have what are called rows, and the rows are designated by numbers. On the top, we have what are called columns, and these are designated by letters. Rows and columns meet in rectangles called cells. For example, the box C2 has the value 0.049. So we can locate any cell by naming its corresponding column letter and row number. We can also use formulas to do calculations in these spreadsheets. Go to Canvas, go to patinoeschool.instructure.com, find financial algebra, find the assignments, find the assignment titled Using Spreadsheets to Create Relative Frequency Tables, and download the pre-made Excel file, Airline Spreadsheet. Pause the video here, and then hit play once you have the file open. All right, I'm going to walk you through the process of creating a relative frequency table using a spreadsheet. Now, we're going to be looking at the exact same problem that we looked at in our last lesson, but we did on paper by hand. Now, the great thing about computers is that they can calculate all of the things we did by hand at a much quicker and much more effective pace and way. So what we're going to do is we're going to be determining the relative frequencies of each of these ranges of airline ticket costs. As we saw before, we can see that there are a different number of bookings in each range of price for the airline tickets. And ultimately, what we're trying to figure out is what percent or what portion or proportion of all of the bookings fall within this range. Okay? Now, remember, in order to do that, for example, for the 100 to 199 range, we need to figure out what portion of all of the bookings this 70 tickets represents. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do to make that happen is we need to figure out the total number of bookings. Okay? Now, in the world of spreadsheets, if you want something to calculate, you must always be on the cell where you want it to go, and you must start with equal. And equal will tell Excel that you're having it calculate or do something. Now, this is a little confusing for some people because in mathematics, on paper, equal comes after what you want it to do, right? And so you'll have the equation, and then you'll have the equal, and then you'll have the response. In this case, we put the equal first. Now, what we want to do here is we want to find the total number of bookings. Now, in other words, I want to add the 70 bookings, the 120 bookings, the 310, and so on. In the world of Excel, we must tell the formula to add specific cells. If you look along the top here, you will notice that all of our columns are labeled with letters, right? We have column A, column B, column C, D, and so on. And then on the left-hand side, we have rows, and these are designated by numbers. Now, if I want to refer to this cell here that has this 70 bookings for the 100 to 199 range, I will be calling that cell B2. So ultimately, I would then type in B2, and you'll notice here that it highlights it. Now remember, I'm trying to get the total of all of the bookings. So then I would want to add, obviously, B3, B4, B5, and so on. As you can imagine, this would get a little tedious, especially if I had more than 11 cells to add, right? So Excel has a built-in formula that we can use. And I want you to think back to one of our first lessons when we looked at what's called sigma notation. Now, if you remember correctly, that sigma, or sign, that Greek letter in mathematics meant to add, and it meant to find the sum. So Excel actually has a built-in formula that will allow us to find the sum. So we're going to type in sum. Now, if we want Excel to do something, we want it to take the sum of something. In Excel, of is always designated by a parentheses. So when you see equals sum, parentheses, that means we're taking the sum of something. Now at this point, the simplest way to do this is just like with the sigma notation. Give it the lower bound. So what is our lowest, or our smallest cell that we're including? And that here is the cell that has the 70, and that's B2. And we want to go all the way through to cell B11, the one with the 22. So instead of typing in every single cell, we can tell it to go through by putting a colon. So we're going to hit colon, and then we're going to tell it to stop at B11, and then close that parentheses. You will notice here now it has highlighted all the cells that we're going to add, and then we're just going to hit enter on our keyboard. Now you will notice now that this cell has just the value. It has the total number of bookings. And we can see that there were a total of 1,434 bookings. But when you click on this cell, you will notice up here in our function section, right, our function bar, that it still has the equation. And if I want to edit the equation, I must click up here, okay? Now, just a quick reminder from the last lesson. We know that the relative frequency is what portion these represent of the total. Now, to get that, we are going to be putting equals again, because we wanted to calculate, we put equals, and we're going to put equals B2 over or out of the total, which is B12. Okay, now when I hit enter, you will first off notice that they've highlighted, those are the cells that I want. It will give me the relative frequency. In other words, how much do these flights, that 100 to 199, represent of all of the flights? Right now we can see that it's 0.049 of the whole. We're going to follow the same process for the rest of these. Now in this one, I would want B3 divided by B12, and you'll notice it does the exact same thing. It highlights the cells we want. There are 120 bookings out of the 1,434. Now you notice on the first two that I actually typed in the cell numbers and letters, but you don't actually have to. You can actually just click on them and it will type it for you. So here I'm going to click on the 310 and I'm going to divide it by that 1434. Now I'm going to show you kind of a neat trick in a second. So you see I'm doing all this clicking. Now, I'm sure you can imagine if I had a lot of these to do, this would be very tedious. So the cool thing in Excel is if you click on a cell that has a formula and you simply drag the cell with the formula down, it will fill it. In this case, it's not, and I think it's because I don't have the cells frozen, so that's okay. I'm going to just follow this process, and I'm going to show you that a little bit later on, once I have the cells frozen. All right, let's continue. I'm getting all of these relative frequencies. And there we go. So now we have the exact same relative frequencies that we had in our previous example one. Write the spreadsheet formula that would find the sum of the relative frequencies and enter that calculated amount into cell C12. Now, if we remember correctly, we found the sum of the number of bookings in cell B12. So if you don't remember what the formula was for that, click on that, and remember, it will show up here in our function space. So we see up here, if we remember correctly, that in order to get the sum of all of our cells, or that represented the number of bookings, we did the sum of B2 to B11. Now over here, they want us to know what goes in C12, and they want us to put the sum of all of these frequencies right here. So in order to do that, I think we should do something similar. So just a quick reminder, what do we begin with? Yes, equals. So we're going to begin with equals, and just like in cell B12, we're going to begin with sum and then parentheses, because remember, that tells us to find the sum of something. Now, the only difference between this one and what's in B12 is we don't want the sum of the booking numbers, right? We want the sum of the relative frequencies. So we're going to take the sum from C2 to C11. Now you will notice that it highlights all the cells that we're trying to add. If we were, for example, to have missed one, let's say we said C9, we would then notice that it didn't include all the cells we'd like. And we're going to close the parentheses and hit enter. And we could see here that the total of the relative frequencies is 1, which makes sense because 1 represents the whole, or 100%. If you look closely at each of these, you will actually notice that each of these is the decimal representation of the percent each price range has of the bookings. So if you look on C2, we could see that there are 4.9% of bookings between $100 and $199. If we looked at, for example, cell C7, we could see that 10.5% of the bookings are between $600 and $699. This will be useful for us later on. All right, so now it's your turn to try something. Let's try this. Suppose that you wanted to add a fourth column that expressed the relative frequency as a percent instead of a decimal. What formula would you have to enter into cell D2 that would turn this 0.049 into a percent? Give it a try. All right, so you were correct if you said that we needed to take the decimal of each cell and then multiply it by 100 because percent means per 100. Now you will notice that initially that these values come out much longer than I would like. So like I showed you previously, we can decrease the number of decimal places by going up and modifying that. So we're going to make it just to the 100th place here. So I can see here that the round trip airline tickets between 100 and 199.99 represent 4.8% of the total. All right, I'm going to do the same for the rest. Times 100 times 100 to get those percents. And I'm going to change all of them to just 2 decimal places after I've put in all the formulas. And then as you can see here that the total is 100%, which makes sense, right? So once again, I'm going to switch the decimal places. So these are all the same. So I'm just going to highlight them all and decrease the place value for each of these to just 2 decimal places. Now, the cool thing about this is I can now use this to answer questions. So, for example, if someone were to ask me what percent of the flights fall in the range of $400 to $499, I would then say 19%, 19.67%, or about 20% of the flights fall in this range. If someone asked me what percent of the flights fall in the range of 300 to 399, I'd say, oh, about 21.62% or 22% of the flights. Okay, so I can use these percents here to answer questions about what's happening in this situation. All right, example 2. Extend the relative frequency table to determine the percent of the flight travel bookings that are below $600. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be adding two additional columns to our spreadsheet. We're going to call them cumulative frequency, like we learned in our last lesson, and relative cumulative frequency. Now, cumulative frequency, if you remember correctly, it just accumulates the totals. So to accumulate means to add on. So we're going to start with the lowest number, which is our 100 to 199 bookings, 100 to $199 airline tickets, and there are 70 bookings. So we will start with accumulating just that cell, the B2. Okay, now you will note here that it comes out more decimal places than I would like. There's no decimals here. So I'm going to actually just go ahead and I'm going to highlight all of the cells in this column. And I'm going to decrease them by 2 decimal places so that I just get the whole number value. Now remember, when I want to accumulate, I want to add on from the previous. So in order to get this cell, I want to add both B2 and B3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use that formula we used before, which is similar, like I said before, to sigma notation. I'm going to put equals sum of B2 colon B3. And that's simply going to accumulate or add those two cells. Okay, so each time I accumulate, I will include the previous ones. So I'm going to do the sum again, but this time I'm going to go from B2 all the way down to B4. And I'm going to repeat this process until I have all of them complete. And you will notice as we do this, kind of a nice cheat is that you can see that it's highlighting the cells that you would like. And so it's just adding on the previous ones and just getting us a new cumulative total. And like I said before, cumulative is just to add on. Let's get these last couple. So equals sum, B2 all the way down through B11. All right, and you will notice that this total here matches this total here, which makes sense, right? So there are 70 airline tickets below $199. There are 199, right, below, or sorry, not 199, 190 below $299, and so on. So all this is doing is adding all of the ones that are less than this row. So when you get all the way up here to the 1,000 and above, we could say that all of the tickets are less than $1,000 plus, which doesn't say much at all, right? All right, so now what we want to do is determine the percent of bookings that are below 600. So we're actually going to go ahead and we're going to get the percents for all of these by first finding the relative cumulative frequency. So we're going to do the same thing that we did here to find relative frequency, but this time we're not doing it on the number of bookings, we're doing it on the cumulative frequencies. So if you remember correctly, in order to get these numbers, these relative frequencies, we took the total number of bookings and we divided by the total. We're going to do something similar here. We're going to take the total number of bookings so far, and we're going to divide by the total, which here is in D11. And we're going to do the same thing for each of these. So we're going to take the total number in that cumulative row and divide it by the total. And we're going to repeat the process until we have them all. Now, what this is doing is it's going to tell us what percent of the bookings are below each price, the top of each price range. Let's get all these put in. You'll notice that I'm not actually typing them in. I'm just clicking on the cells. If you feel more comfortable just typing, you are welcome to do that. For me, it's a little bit simpler to just click. And then, of course, when we get here, we should be at that 1 or that 100%. Now, just like I showed you before, we can convert all of these relative cumulative frequencies, I'm going to put RCF here, into percent. Now, we can do that by taking each of them and multiplying by 100. Remember, 100 is percent. And we are going to, really quickly, before I finish the rest of those, I want to change the decimal places on here to the thousandths place. So I'm just going to go ahead and, sorry, it doesn't like what I have selected. I'm going to go ahead and highlight those, and I'm going to decrease those until I just have 3 decimal places after the decimal point, which is my thousandths place. And then I'm going to go ahead and center that so it matches the rest. All right, I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I'm going to click on each of these and convert them to a percent, right, times 100. This is the easy part, right? Just a little bit repetitive. Now, the thing is, you will notice, like I said before, if you add up all these percents all the way to the bottom, you will end up at that 100%. All right. So you will notice that the relative cumulative frequency gives us slightly different information than what the relative frequency does. So you will notice here, if we click here in this F11, that this is telling us that 100% of the flights fall below the 1,000 and above, which is true, which has kind of little meaning because 1,000 and above could mean just about anything. This is a little more meaningful right here in F10. F10 is telling us that about 98.5% of the flights fall below $999.99, and so on. So, for example, let's pick another one. This cell here, F3, is telling us that about 13.2% of the flights are cheaper than $299. Okay, so I'm going to actually change these as well so that we're only getting about 2 decimal places after the decimal point for our percent. So let's just move that a little bit. Perfect. All right, so the question here asked us to extend the relative frequency table to determine the percent. You see that we've done that. And we want to know what percent of the flight travel bookings that are below 600. So we're going to find in the category 600, I see that here, but we don't want between 600 and 699. We want below 600. So we're actually going to jump down 1 row. We'll see here that these bookings in this row are $599.99, and everything below that is here, right? And so, like I said before, this cumulative frequency, it's counting everything below it. So we'll see here that if we look at this row, we can actually see the answer to the question. And we can see in this cell that about 66.25% of all of our bookings are below $600. And so that right there is our answer to this question.
All right, let's try this. What does 0.545 in the relative cumulative frequency column represent? Take a look, give it a try. Here's another one. Try this. What percent of bookings fell between $700 and $999.99? Be careful here. It does say between and not below. Give it a try. Your homework tonight is the travel expenses spreadsheet practice. Go to Canvas, download it, complete it using the correct Excel or Sheets formulas, and then re-upload the correct newly saved file.